The National Electrical Code (NEC) does not specifically prohibit the attachment of Smurf tubing to floor joists in the manner described. However, the NEC does require that electrical wiring methods be installed in a manner that is not subject to physical damage. Let's consider the arguments for permitting attachment to floor joists. Firstly, secure fastening is a key consideration. If the tubing is securely fastened to the floor joists, this reduces the likelihood of it being pulled down accidentally. Secondly, protection from drills comes into play. If the tubing is not securely fastened, drilling the floor joist could potentially damage it. Thirdly, reduced labor and time can be a factor. Attaching the tubing to the floor joists instead of drilling through them can save time and labor during the installation process. Now, let's examine the arguments against attaching Smurf tubing to floor joists. Firstly, accessibility can be a concern. If the tubing is attached to the floor joists, it may be difficult to access and replace it in the future if repairs or modifications are needed. Secondly, possible damage needs to be considered. While it can be argued that someone could still grab and pull down the tubing even if it were drilled through the joists, attaching it to the joists may increase the risk of damage during installation or removal. Thirdly, the intent of the NEC needs to be understood. The NEC requirement for electrical wiring to be installed in a manner that is not subject to physical damage is intended to prevent situations where wiring could be easily damaged, such as by being exposed to accidental impacts or being pulled on. Ultimately, the decision of whether or not to attach Smurf tubing to floor joists is often a judgment call that must be made by the electrical inspector based on the specific conditions of the installation. If the tubing is securely fastened and adequately protected from potential damage, it may be permitted. However, it is important to note that there may be some inspectors who would not allow this particular method. Here are a few recommendations. Firstly, discuss your proposed installation thoroughly with the electrical inspector who will be responsible for the inspection of the project. Secondly, provide documentation or photos clearly showing how the tubing will be securely fastened and effectively protected. Thirdly, consider using an alternative wiring method that does not necessitate drilling through floor joists, such as flexible metal conduit or surface-mounted raceways, as these may offer a more readily accepted solution. The interpretation of subject to physical damage is crucial here. The NEC doesn't provide a precise definition, leaving it open to interpretation by the authority having jurisdiction, which is usually the electrical inspector. The inspector will assess whether the installation is likely to be damaged during normal use of the building. Factors they consider may include the height of the tubing above the floor, the likelihood of objects being stored or moved in the area, and the general activity level in the basement. The concern that someone might deliberately pull the tubing down is less likely to be considered a valid reason to reject the installation, unless there's a specific reason to believe that such activity is likely to occur. The inspector is more concerned with accidental damage. The secureness of the fastening is paramount. The method used to attach the tubing to the floor joist must be robust enough to prevent the tubing from becoming dislodged due to vibration, temperature changes, or minor impacts. Using appropriate clamps or straps specifically designed for supporting electrical tubing is essential. The spacing of the supports is also important. The NEC specifies maximum support intervals for different types of wiring methods, and these guidelines should be followed for Smurf tubing as well. If the spacing is too wide, the tubing may sag or become more vulnerable to damage. Consider the environment of the unfinished basement. Is it damp or prone to moisture? If so, use fittings and supports that are suitable for wet locations. Is there a risk of chemical exposure? If so, choose tubing and supports that are resistant to the chemicals present. The NEC mandates that electrical equipment be suitable for the environment in which it is installed. If there are any exposed connections or splices in the tubing, they must be made inside approved junction boxes. Junction boxes provide protection for the connections and prevent them from being accidentally touched or damaged. The boxes must be securely mounted to the floor joist or other structural members. Ensure that the junction boxes are accessible for future maintenance or repairs. They should not be hidden behind finished walls or ceilings. The NEC requires that all electrical equipment be accessible unless specifically permitted otherwise. If the Smurf tubing is run in a concealed location such as behind a finished wall, it must be protected from physical damage by a suitable covering or enclosure. The covering or enclosure should be strong enough to withstand any potential impacts or abrasions. The NEC provides guidelines for protecting wiring in concealed locations. It's worth considering the long-term implications of attaching Smurf tubing to floor joists. Over time, the wood in the joist may shrink or warp, which could loosen the supports and cause the tubing to sag. It's important to use supports that are resistant to corrosion and that can accommodate some movement of the wood. Regularly inspect the installation to ensure that the supports are still secure and that the tubing is in good condition. If any problems are found, take prompt action to correct them. The NEC requires that electrical systems be maintained in a safe and reliable condition. If the electrical inspector is not comfortable with attaching Smurf tubing directly to the floor joists, there are other options that can be considered. One option is to install a running board along the joists and attach the tubing to the running board. The running board provides a solid surface for the support and protects the tubing from physical damage. Another option is to use flexible metal conduit (FMC) or electrical metallic tubing (EMT) instead of Smurf tubing. FMC and EMT are more robust wiring methods that are better able to withstand physical damage. They can be attached to the floor joist using appropriate clamps or straps. If you choose to use FMC or EMT, be sure to follow the NEC guidelines for grounding and bonding. Grounding and bonding are essential for electrical safety. It's always a good idea to consult with a qualified electrician before making any electrical installations. A qualified electrician can assess the specific conditions of your installation and recommend the best wiring method for your needs. They can also ensure that the installation complies with all applicable codes and regulations. Remember that electrical work can be dangerous, and it's always best to leave it to the professionals. Improperly installed electrical wiring can cause fires, shocks, and other hazards. The NEC is a comprehensive set of rules and regulations that govern the installation of electrical wiring and equipment. It is updated every 3 years to reflect changes in technology and best practices. The NEC is intended to protect people and property from electrical hazards. Familiarize yourself with the NEC requirements that apply to your installation. The NEC is available for purchase from the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA. Many libraries also have copies of the NEC available for reference. Online resources can provide helpful information about the NEC, but be sure to verify the accuracy of the information with the official NEC document. Local jurisdictions may have amendments to the NEC that are specific to their area. Be sure to check with your local building department to see if there are any local amendments that apply to your installation. Following the NEC and consulting with a qualified electrician are the best ways to ensure that your electrical installation is safe and compliant. When discussing the installation with the electrical inspector, be prepared to answer questions about the following. Firstly, what type of Smurf tubing are you using, and is it listed for the intended application? Secondly, what method are you using to attach the tubing to the floor joists, and how secure is it? Thirdly, what is the spacing between the supports? Fourthly, how is the tubing protected from physical damage? Fifthly, are there any exposed connections or splices, and if so, are they in approved junction boxes? Sixthly, is the installation accessible for future maintenance and repairs? Seventhly, does the installation comply with all applicable NEC requirements and local amendments? By addressing these questions proactively, you can demonstrate to the inspector that you have carefully considered the safety and compliance aspects of the installation. Remember, the electrical inspector's primary responsibility is to ensure the safety of the electrical system. By working collaboratively with the inspector and providing clear and concise information, you can increase the likelihood of a successful inspection.